Now, there are once again rumors swirling around that, at long last, Ewan McGregor will finally be returning to the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, though it won't be in the form of a movie, which has been long talked about, but rather will be in a limited run series on the upcoming Disney Plus streaming service. And I of course do want to put the emphasis on rumor, because this is hardly the first time something like this has seemed to be on the verge of becoming a reality. In fact, sources say the Obi-Wan anthology movie had actually been in pre-production, but got cancelled after the utter failure of Solo at the box office, and sent everyone at Disney and Lucasfilm back to the drawing board, trying to figure out what to do with Star Wars now. Even though they probably would have been just fine carrying on with the Kenobi movie, as this poll I put up a few hours ago begins to suggest. And before I go on, let me just take a moment to say thank you to those who quickly got in there and voted and or commented. As I've said in the past, I'd like to do more of these quick take style polls when news comes to my attention so I can kind of gauge the reaction of my fellow fans and then talk about it. And to be clear, these are different from my weekly Let's Talk Some Star Wars polls that I let run for a week before getting to, in the hopes that, well, everyone can have their say. Anyway, digging into the results of the poll here, only 5% of people who responded have absolutely no interest in something with Kenobi in it, while on the opposite side of the fence, 57% of people just want Ewan McGregor to return to the role of Obi-Wan and don't really care about the when and the wheres and the hows. They just want to see him again. And this is the group I myself fall into because, and I don't say this lightly, but when someone says Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor's is actually the first version that pops into my head. And I'd be curious to know what version of Obi-Wan is your personal favorite, or which is the first that pops into your head when you hear that name. But getting back to it here, as the poll also suggests, I think most people would rather see a movie over a series. And honestly, a series, and rumors are that it'll be 6 episodes long, well, that does seem like a lot of time to spend in the desert. Now, you certainly could, and the show no doubt will, include other characters beyond just Obi-Wan, and they could mainly be characters that might be looking for him, with 2 fun possibilities being Vader and or Ahsoka, though they'd obviously be looking for him for very different reasons. And I'm not saying they would succeed in finding him, especially in the case of Vader, just that they might be included to offer, a change of scenery from time to time. Though it is interesting to note that Ahsoka meets up with Bail Organa in the new canon, and thanks to him, she begins working as a Fulcrum agent for the Rebellion. And as you of course know, Bail is one of the 2 people in the galaxy who actually knows where Kenobi is. And no, I'm not suggesting he'd actually tell Ahsoka his location, even though he knows about the deep friendship between the 2 of them, but she's certainly inquisitive and resourceful enough to maybe figure it out on her own, maybe because of something Bail slips up and says at some point, something no one else would take as a clue other than her. Anyway, I think it'd be great to see a reunion between Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, especially considering he was almost like a second master to her. Now, do we need to see it if this series truly happens? No. Is it a bit much? Sure, maybe. But I do think it'd be interesting to hear how Kenobi explains why he's exiled himself on Tatooine, because I don't think there's any chance, no matter how much he trusts her, that he'd tell her he's watching over Anakin's son. He'd also, assuming he even knows at this point, keep it from her that Anakin became Vader, fearing that she might go after him. Okay, let's now take a look at some of the things you all had to say, starting with the top-rated comment, which came to us from a young Smitty who said, "I'd rather have a Kenobi movie with a feel similar to Logan, with Obi-Wan struggling to battle the dangerous forces on Tatooine, as well as master the feelings of regret, guilt, and PTSD he's gained since the Clone Wars ended." And whether it's a movie or series, something like Logan is the tone or feel I'd hope they'd go for with a story about Kenobi set in this time period. Because I don't know about you, and it might sound a little silly, but one of the things I love about that movie is I can feel the weight and years of pain and regret on Logan's shoulders. I might be lazily sitting on my butt staring at a screen, but I just feel tired, old, and worn out when I'm watching that movie. I can feel everything he does, and there are so very few movies where you have that kind of connection with the character. And I've even spoken with people who know next to nothing about Wolverine or even the X-Men who absolutely just love that movie. Anyway, before I launch into a full-blown review of Logan, I think something similar to the story they gave Luke in The Last Jedi could have worked for Kenobi. And hear me out before you say you don't like the idea, because I'm not proposing we have 6 episodes of Obi-Wan moping around Tatooine talking about the Jedi needing to end, only to have some type of revelation in the last episode about why they must go on. What I'm instead saying is Kenobi had every reason to end up like Luke in The Last Jedi, maybe even more so than Luke did actually. I mean, think about it. Where Luke blames the Jedi of the past for his current failures, Kenobi not only was one of those Jedi of the past, he was the one who failed Anakin, and that led to the direct destruction of the Jedi and the Republic. I mean, imagine being Obi-Wan Kenobi after he goes into exile. Imagine having all that time on your hands to think about everything you've done, where it all went wrong. Imagine you're a Jedi, that you have this amazing power that you could use to make a difference and maybe begin to right your wrongs. But instead of doing that, you're hiding out on a waste of a planet while the entire galaxy suffers because of your failures. And you're putting all your hope on the child of the guy who betrayed you and the rest of the Jedi, and helped destroy that which you had devoted your entire life to. And if they can capture that kind of feeling or essence, then I think they could have a hell of a series on their hands, even if it never or rarely leaves the sands of Tatooine. And a great name for it could have been Kenobi, the Last Jedi. Because maybe his faith is starting to waver a bit, and he's also no longer able to commune with Yoda, assuming he could or did in the first place, and that he also can no longer commune with Qui-Gon Jinn from the Beyond. Or maybe he just could never master it in the first place. Maybe he's yet to be able to reach Qui-Gon Jinn for his training to become a Force Ghost, though of course he will by the end of the show. Maybe he feels like the last Jedi in the galaxy, and he hates that he's letting himself waste away when he could be doing something. And it's this self-loathing, this hatred, that's holding him back and what he needs to overcome in order to become the epitome of a Jedi, which is what I feel like he is when we see him again in both Rebels and A New Hope. Okay, let's get to another comment here. This one from Gianfranco Marie, who said, "The problem is not if I want to see something about Kenobi. I do. The real problem is if I think the current Disney Lucasfilm can do it justice. I don't." And this was of course a concern echoed by a lot of people in the comments, to put it mildly, and one I obviously share to some extent. Then again, I'd be nervous about this show one way or another, no matter who's involved in making it, mainly because this is likely going to be very different from anything else we've seen out of Star Wars before, well, at least on screen. Most of this show, obviously, is going to take place on Tatooine and center around Kenobi. In other words, this is likely going to have a very slow pace. Kenobi isn't going to whip out his lightsaber multiple times each episode and take care of business, and if that's what you're hoping for and expecting out of the show, you're going to be greatly disappointed. Even the new main series Star Wars comics, the ones that have included Kenobi from this time period, thanks to a journal Luke found and reads in a couple of issues, have already established Obi-Wan's reluctance to do anything that might out him as a Jedi. So likely the most action we'll get out of this show is through some type of B-plot that, as I talked about before, may involve a character that is looking for Kenobi or something else taking place on Tatooine that Kenobi is trying hard to ignore, but eventually must confront. Which is kind of what one of those aforementioned comics already did. Either way, a lot could go wrong with this series, that's absolutely true. But a lot could go right with it, and the potential to give fans a true classic involving one of their favorite characters of all time is absolutely there. Okay, let's get to another comment. This one from Arc7740, who said, "I am just mad if it is exclusively on Disney's streaming service. I can't afford another one of those." And yet again, this was something a lot of people mentioned in their comments, and something that is getting truly frustrating, that all these different companies are starting their own streaming services. And it was fine for most people when all they had to do was pay for one of them, like Netflix, but now the content so many of us want to see is spread out over so many multiple different platforms. And before you know it, you're subscribed to a half dozen of them and paying $50 a month or something along those lines. And though I think Disney's service will not only succeed but thrive, considering how many properties they have at their disposal to make new content for, and that they have an extensive catalog of old movies, cartoons, and so on, I don't think it's long before a lot of these services start falling by the wayside, or Disney will just buy them, since that just seems to be what Disney does these days. Okay, now to get to one last comment here, which is a little off topic, but it's something I'd like to talk about briefly and get your thoughts on as well. Maybe I'll even do a full video on it in the future. Anyway, it comes to us from Waggy Bottoms, who said this: "Doesn't matter how they do it, you all will hate it, like you did when the prequels came out, giving Lucas so much crap he wanted nothing to do with it anymore and sold it to Disney. The same hate you're giving the Disney movies now." And my apologies, because I don't want to single you out since many people make this argument, but I don't know how much water it actually holds when you really look at the evidence. Not when you keep in mind that originally, George Lucas, when he was done with the prequels, started plans to create a Star Wars TV show. And that's not something I think he does if he truly had let the hate for the prequels really get to him. Anyway, it was going to be called Underground, and as the name implies, deal more with the criminal element in the Star Wars galaxy. There are even something like 50 episodes written, and the only reason it never got made is because Lucas thought it'd be too expensive to do the way he wanted to, since he really wanted it to look like Star Wars. And he was waiting for the technology to get cheaper so that he could actually make it. Also, keep in mind he did give us the Clone Wars animated series, which again seems odd to do if he wanted nothing to do with Star Wars since he was heavily involved in the creation of that show. So I don't know that all the hate for the prequels really destroyed George Lucas and was the reason he sold Lucasfilm. I actually think there's a lot of truth to the reason he gave, that he knew he wasn't going to live forever, but he wanted someone to be able to bring Star Wars to future generations, and, well, he thought Disney was the best one to do that. Now, has Disney done a great job so far? Well, some will flat out say no and think it's the worst thing that has ever happened to Star Wars, while others, believe it or not, have been very pleased with their handling of it so far. Personally, I think they've gotten some things right, some things wrong, but the real problem is their biggest mistake was a huge glaring one, that being The Last Jedi. That movie completely missed the mark with me and a lot of other fans, and it was such a big error that it's overshadowed a lot of the actual good that they have done. So when it comes to this rumored Kenobi series, of course I have fears that the current team at Lucasfilm will get it all wrong, but I also have to hope that they'll get it right. As I say in a lot of my videos, I don't want Star Wars to suck. I want it to be great, and I really don't care who makes that happen or how. And I'll gladly praise Disney and Lucasfilm when they get things right, and I'll call them out and express my disappointment when they get them wrong. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to let me know your hopes and fears for the possible Kenobi series, or to tell me why you think Lucas ultimately sold Lucasfilm. Was he tired of Star Wars? Was it about the money? Or did he really just want future generations to be able to enjoy his creation long after he was gone? Or maybe it's a mix of all three. Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.